Once upon a time in the city, everyone from the village came to the city to work. Unlike in the village, in the city, everyone went about their own business and cared less about what the next person was doing. There was a man called James. James was famous for dressing very well. He had a lot of nice suits and the best Brentwood trousers in town, but he had a secret that not even his wife and friends knew about. The secret was that a few months ago, he had dreamed about ghosts telling him about a hidden treasure in an old shack back in the village. The dream had felt so real that he couldn't stop thinking about it. He thus set off to his village during the holidays and went to the shack to look for the treasure, and guess what? He actually found it. The ghosts had told him then, "Promise never to wear a belt again, and the treasure is yours." A strange but small price to pay for such a big reward, he had thought at the time, and he agreed. He then took the treasure back to the city in a suitcase. But when he tried to exchange the money in the bank, it turned into ordinary tools inside the suitcase right in front of the bank workers. Feeling embarrassed and confused, he went back home with the suitcase, and upon opening it, the suitcase had money in it again. He was so confused and did not know what to do, so he went to see a traditional healer in his village. The healer, also called a sangoma, was known for talking to spirits and helping people with problems that couldn't be explained. James went to the sangoma because he was really worried and needed help. The sangoma's place was full of old and powerful objects. Surrounded by the smell of herbs and the sound of drums, James hoped to get some helpful answers. The sangoma listened to his story about the strange dreams and the money that kept changing into tools. The sangoma gazed at him in a way that made it seem like he could see right into his heart, and he talked in confusing ways, suggesting James might have made a mistake with the promise he made to the ghosts, which is why he cannot access the wealth. The sangoma told James to follow the old ways and do certain rituals to make the spirits happy and fix any mistakes he made with the ghosts. The sangoma said it was important to keep a good balance and respect with the spirits, repeating that James's bad luck might be because he didn't keep his promise with the ghosts. The rituals included giving gifts, singing, and doing things to help James connect with the spiritual world and to apologize for anything wrong that he could have done. The sangoma believed that being in harmony with the spirits was important for a good life. Suddenly, James lost his job in the city for no clear reason. He went back to his village to be with his family. This was too much for him to handle, and he started to lose his mind. He walked around the village, lost and confused. At first, the dream about the ghosts and the treasure seemed like good luck, but when the money turned into tools at the bank, he started to feel like he was losing touch with reality. The traditional healer's words made him even more worried that he had done something wrong. If the traditional healer could not point out the mistake that he made, who else could tell him? Losing his job was a big shock. It took away his senses of who he was and what he was supposed to do. He hoped to find comfort with his family, but they were equally confused. He became like a ghost himself, haunted by memories of better times and the promises of the ghosts. People in the village felt sorry for him. He used to be known for dressing really well, especially his fancy trousers, but now he looked messy and talked to himself. He couldn't accept what was happening to him and often talked to the empty suitcase, wishing that if he could turn back the hands of time, but it was too late. In the end, he couldn't deal with all the sadness and confusion. James, who used to be so successful and admired in his village, became a sad example of what can happen when you chase after things that aren't real. Mary, James's wife, who at first didn't know about the ghosts that supposedly gave them the money, watched her husband change with worry and confusion. She saw the James she knew, who used to be down to earth, get caught up in a dream that seemed too strange to be real. As the money stared them back in the face at home, but changed to tools once out of their home, she started to become more and more afraid as to what indeed was happening. Mary, who was very sensible, did talk to him about the strange money. She felt that money that just shows up like that, especially with weird rules, must have some problems attached to it. She was scared and upset, and she asked him to think about the chance that their new money, which can only be seen if it is in their house, had something to do with things they couldn't understand. She suggested to James that when the ghosts told him not to wear a belt again, perhaps it was an idiom which meant something else not related to the literal belt worn around the waist. What else could they have meant if this was a figure of speech? She inquired. One day Mary asked James to take just one note from the suitcase and try to buy with it from the local shop, but when James got to the shop, the money was gone. It was like James was dreaming again, and he would soon wake up. When the told his wife, she became even more scared. She begged him to think about his dream, the ghosts, and the strange rule about not wearing a belt. Maybe there is something that he missed when they gave him the rules. She was really worried as she saw her husband getting too caught up in something that didn't make sense. But no matter what she said, James was too caught up in the promises of the ghosts, and he wouldn't listen to her. He was sure that they only asked him not to wear a belt for the rest of his life in order to access the wealth. He followed a path that ended in sadness, and Mary was left to think about what happens when a dream is too good to be true. Mary, because she cared so much about her husband and their family, she went out to look for help. She talked to friends and respected people in the village about the weird money and how her husband was acting. They tried to think of ways to help, like getting advice from spiritual leaders or wise people in the community. But even with all her trying, James got worse, and nothing the community did helped. Mary's actions showed how much she loved her husband, even as their family faced a terrible situation. Her husband's fixation on the promise from the ghosts and how everything went wrong after that must have been very upsetting for her. She probably struggled with how different their lives became, the weird rule he had to follow of not wearing a belt ever again in his life, and how their family fell apart. In the end, her thoughts on all this were lost with her, leaving only a story that warns about the dangers of chasing after impossible dreams. As a last nail on the coffin, a terrible accident happened. James mysteriously lost his Mary and kids. This was a heavy blow to his being. His mind, which used to be full of plans and ambition, was now filled with chaos and sadness. The ghosts that had promised him wealth now seemed to laugh at him. He couldn't understand why he lost his job, why the money acted so strangely, and why his family had to die. The villagers, who used to look up to him, now felt sorry for him and were a little afraid. James, who used to be so proud, with his nice trousers as a sign of his success, now walked around in torn clothes, looking empty. The ghosts that visited James were mysterious and lived by rules that people couldn't understand. They look after hidden treasure and are connected to it by ghostly ties. They came to James as see-through visions, flickering like the light of a candle. Their voices were like whispers, promising great wealth, but also making him feel uneasy with their weird rules. James's time with these spirits was short, but it changed his life. They made a deal with clear terms, and even though they only asked him not to wear belts, their real plans were hidden. He spent his time alone, and kept on talking to the suitcase that now had continuously contained tools, as if he still had hope for positive change. He was stuck between the life he knew and the curse that hit him. On his last day, James was just a shadow of who he used to be. He died quietly, by himself, with all his dreams gone. The suitcase with the tools was left behind, a quiet reminder of a life that once flew high with a promise from the ghosts, only to fall into deep sadness. The suitcase, left alone and forgotten, was a sad reminder of how James's big dreams turned into a bad situation. James, who used to dress very nicely, passed away, leaving behind only a box of tools. James's funeral was quiet and serious, with people from the village who remembered him when he was happier. They came to say goodbye and to help each other feel better about the sadness that had come over the village. The fact that so many people came showed how much James had meant to them. Even though his life ended sadly, they remembered him as someone who was stylish, ambitious, and full of dreams. As everyone came together, there was a soft sound of prayers and people remembering James. In the end, the funeral wasn't just to say goodbye to James. It was also a time for the community to think about how life can be fragile and how there are mysterious things that can change our lives. It was a reminder that every story that becomes a legend started with a real person, and that person's story touches the hearts of those who are left behind. The people in the city felt very sad about James's death. They had seen him get rich and were impressed, but also a bit jealous. Then, they saw him lose everything, which made them very worried. For them, his life was a reminder that luck can change quickly and that there are things we can't see that affect our lives. James, who used to be someone everyone looked up to, became a sad example of how hard life can be when you face big losses and confusion. They quietly talked about how unfair it was that he lost his mind and how sad it was when his family died. Even the Sangoma, who could only watch as James's life got worse and worse, was present at the funeral. Their last meeting was a sad reminder that there are things in the world we can't see or understand, and messing with them can have serious consequences. After James died, the suitcase, a sad reminder of his big dreams, was left in his simple house. The people in the village didn't want to touch it because they thought it might be cursed. It became something people were afraid of, a sign of a dream that turned into a nightmare. The empty suitcase with tools inside was proof of what James went through. The people treated it with respect and a bit of fear. It became a story that parents told their kids to warn them about chasing after things that aren't real and to listen to the warnings from the world of spirits. People are always curious, and the people in the village were no different. Even though they were scared and had heard strange stories about James's suitcase, some thought about opening it. They wondered if the tools inside, which used to be money, might turn back into money, or if they had some other secret. But the sadness that seemed to hang around the suitcase stopped them. It was as if James's sad spirit was watching over it, protecting his lost hopes. The few who got close to the suitcase felt really sad, as if they could feel James's own sadness. As time went on, the suitcase and its tools became part of stories told around the fire. Older people talked about it quietly, telling young people to be careful about being greedy and dealing with ghosts. It wasn't just a set of tools. It was a reminder of a life that fell apart because of chasing a dream that wasn't meant to be. The suitcase stayed there, getting dusty, a leftover from James, who went after a fortune promised by ghosts and ended up with a very sad ending. What it left behind wasn't wealth, but lessons for those who knew James and the sad story of how his life ended. His death was a relief from his pain and a sad end to a life that once had so much potential. While there was a lesson to be learned, it is from history that we learn that people never learn anything from history, hence the term, history repeats itself. Eventually, The suitcase and what was inside it just disappeared into the ground, and all that was left were memories and a warning that seemed to be whispered by the wind in the neighborhood. Will the dream come to someone else? Will they have access to the wealth this time? These were the whispers. Even then, in episode 2, we tell of a different and independent tale of ghostly money as told by those who know the story well. Will people ever learn?